Clint Eastwood strode into the sleek, marble-floored showroom of Bradford & Sons luxury cars, unaware that a single moment of confrontation would ignite a chain reaction of instant karma unlike anything this dealership had ever seen. In that split second, he locked eyes with a manager whose arrogance matched the glint of spotless vehicles on display, setting the stage for a shocking twist of fate that would leave everyone reeling and the manager scrambling to confront the harsh consequences of his actions. At first glance, it looked like an ordinary afternoon at the most prestigious car dealership in town. Sales associates bustled between polished convertibles and glimmering SUVs, each determined to make a hefty commission. Customers wandered the aisles, enchanted by the allure of high-end automobiles with sumptuous leather seats and cutting-edge technology. Somewhere in the back corner, the faint hum of an espresso machine punctuated the otherwise hushed, respectful atmosphere reserved for clients of means. Yet beneath this glossy veneer, tension brewed, an energy you could feel beneath the bright track lights. In that quiet moment, Clint Eastwood became the unintentional lightning rod for a clash of egos that no one saw coming. At the heart of this storm was the new dealership manager Raymond Ray Devlin, whose inflated confidence and laser-focused ambition set the tone for the entire sales floor. Lean, sharp-eyed, and impeccably dressed, he prided himself on running the business with unyielding discipline. Most of the staff feared him more than they respected him. Ray had a habit of judging people by their appearance, an arrogance that would soon be his downfall. But he was convinced that his unshakable authority and knack for reading customers made the dealership successful. When Clint Eastwood walked through the vast glass doors in a simple jacket and worn boots, Ray's glance pegged him as another aimless visitor who didn't belong among these luxurious vehicles. Like a hawk spotting prey, Ray moved in, determined to maintain what he believed was the decorum of his showroom. He greeted Clint with a curt nod, his tone all business. Immediately there was friction. Clint's calm, measured presence clashed with Ray's overbearing sense of importance. Something about Clint's quiet confidence seemed to spark Ray's suspicion. The man's face was vaguely familiar to the manager, but he couldn't place it, if only he paid closer attention. Instead, he sized him up as someone who wouldn't drop a cent on these cars, let alone invest a fortune. In the span of a single breath, the tension intensified. Ray's words were clipped, and his posture screamed impatience. Clint, meanwhile, maintained a respectful stance, his eyes flickering around the sparkling vehicles as though taking mental notes. Anyone watching could sense an undercurrent of electricity in the air. The staff glanced at them from across the showroom, curious about the newcomer who seemed unimpressed by the high-end spectacle. It was evident that Clint Eastwood wasn't there to browse idly. He had a purpose, and it wasn't just about buying a car. Then, with an icy edge in his voice, Ray demanded to know why Clint was loitering among the showroom's most expensive models. He offered no greeting worthy of a potential client, no courtesy, no question about his preferences, nothing. Instead, he insisted that casual visitors, who weren't genuinely buying, should head to the sidewalk. A few shocked sales associates exchanged worried looks but did nothing to intervene. They were used to Ray's brusque demeanor, yet this felt different. It was laced with a dangerous sense of finality. Clint stared at Ray for a tense moment, composed but insulted, as if measuring the weight of the man's words. There was an unmistakable sadness in his eyes, disappointment that someone could be so quick to judge without a simple handshake or polite conversation. He paused, letting the moment hang in the air, before quietly explaining that he had an appointment. Ray snorted in disbelief, crossing his arms defiantly. He insisted no appointment under Eastwood was on his schedule, commanding Clint to leave. All at once, the entire showroom seemed to hold its breath. The staff, the security guard, and even a couple of interested car enthusiasts froze in place, unsure of what would happen next. Clint Eastwood gave a measured nod and stepped back, silently deciding to let this encounter unfold without a fight. Little did Ray realize that the very man he was so eager to kick out would soon reveal his true identity in a manner that would shake the dealership to its core. The scene was set for a stunning revelation, and instant karma was about to strike. Raymond Ray Devlin had always craved control, which showed in every facet of his life. Growing up in a small, conservative town with rigid social structures, he learned early on that rules, and those who enforced them, wielded the most power. His father was the local sheriff, a stern man who believed discipline was the backbone of any functioning community. For Ray, bedtime was strictly at 8, homework had to be completed with no margin for error, and personal expression was often dismissed as frivolous. He watched as his father's unwavering approach earned both fear and respect from neighbors. Determined to prove he could be even more successful, Ray vowed to climb the social ladder at any cost. Over time, that ambition morphed into a superiority complex that drove him to scrutinize everyone he met as either an asset or an obstacle. Even after leaving his hometown for the promise of city life, Ray never truly abandoned his father's teachings. Rather, he adapted them to a new environment. He landed an entry-level position at Bradford & Sons Luxury Cars, filing papers and delivering coffee. From the start, he perceived the dealership as a place where those with the highest price tags commanded the greatest respect. Inch by inch, he worked his way up from sales associate to senior salesman, then to assistant manager. Finally, he claimed the manager's seat when an opportunity presented itself. In his mind, that accomplishment proved he had mastered the art of reading people, a skill he believed justified his cold judgments and snap decisions. If he thought a potential customer wasn't worth his time, he brushed them aside without a second thought. Politeness, in his view, was merely a courtesy extended to those who deserved it. Clint Eastwood, on the other hand, had no need to flaunt wealth or influence. For many years, he'd lived a life shaped by quiet determination, creative pursuits, and a humble respect for everyone he encountered. Despite his tremendous success in the film industry, and the broad recognition that came with it, Clint rarely used his reputation as a bargaining chip. He believed in observing people for who they were rather than who he expected them to be. Raised on values that championed kindness and fairness, he had a keen sense of empathy that often made him the quiet observer in any room he stepped into. Unfortunately, none of that mattered when Ray confronted him. The manager had formed an opinion, which was enough to spark the conflict. While Clint Eastwood may not seem like a typical victim, in that moment he became precisely that. He arrived at the dealership intending to finalize a significant business arrangement that would shake up the company's leadership from the ground up. Yet, instead of being greeted with courtesy or a simple handshake, he was met with open hostility. Dressed in comfortable clothes and soft-spoken demeanor, Clint labeled himself an unwelcome guest by Ray's narrow, superficial standards. No matter that he was there by appointment, no matter that he'd come prepared to invest, perhaps even create new job opportunities for the existing staff. To Ray, he was just another nobody, off the street, a minor inconvenience disrupting the pristine facade of the luxury showroom. Clint revealed little of his inner thoughts in those brief, tense exchanges. The flicker of hurt and disappointment in his eyes spoke volumes, though. He felt that subtle sting of prejudice, the kind that lumps entire groups of people into simplistic categories. It was personal and unjust, but his quiet strength guided him to keep calm. After all, Clint wasn't merely a passing stranger with no recourse. He was a deeply principled individual with the power to change not just the conversation's direction, but the entire dealership's fate. Thus, the stage was set for a clash between two diametrically opposed personalities. On one side stood Ray Devlin, whose drive for power was matched only by his inability to see beyond surface appearances. On the other side stood Clint Eastwood, a man with a profound sense of fairness and enough influence to flip Ray's world upside down. If only the manager would realize who he was honestly dealing with. The tension between them would soon break, forging a path of karmic retribution that none of the unsuspecting staff could have anticipated. The harsh judgments and deep-seated biases Ray carried would soon collide with Clint's quietly commanding presence, culminating in a dramatic confrontation that promised to unravel Ray's sense of control once and for all. Ray Devlin started his morning at Bradford & Sons Luxury Cars the same way he always did. A strict review of the floor plan, a quick lecture to the sales team on their monthly targets, and a curt inspection of each shining luxury vehicle. His posture was rigid, and his expression sour as he surveyed the staff. Even the hum of the air conditioning seemed to carry the tension of his presence. Today he was on edge because he was expecting a high-stakes meeting with the dealership's major investor. Someone whose influence could either bolster Ray's position or jeopardize it entirely. Of course, Ray kept that pressure to himself. He wouldn't let anyone suspect his nerves, not even his most trusted assistant, Naomi. She noticed his unusually restless pacing and tight jaw but chose not to press him for details. Over the years, the staff had learned that Ray's temper flared most when he felt cornered or stressed. A single misstep in front of him could mean a scolding that echoed across the showroom, humiliating even the most seasoned employees. The dread that followed Ray around felt particularly heavy on this day. The tension only intensified when Clint Eastwood walked through those glass doors. As soon as Ray spotted him, wearing a simple jacket and well-worn boots, he felt annoyed. Instead of recognizing Clint's face or even contemplating that this newcomer might be a legitimate client, Ray saw someone who didn't fit his mold of a wealthy buyer. He was convinced the man was there to ogle the cars and waste the dealership's time. Ray knew that his big investor meeting was connected to Clint's visit. But Ray's biases blinded him to the truth. Meanwhile, Clint sensed the simmering tension as he strolled through the polished aisles. Each vehicle gleamed under the overhead lights, and the staff moved about with forced smiles that failed to mask their anxiety. He could feel their eyes darting between him and Ray, the menacing figure watching from across the showroom. In quiet moments, Clint caught sales associates whispering to each other, likely warning one another not to get on the manager's bad side. The environment was eerily formal, more concerned with appearances than genuine courtesy. Ray, for his part, kept an iron grip on the situation. He marched toward Clint with a brisk, almost confrontational stride. Approaching him, Ray asked in a clipped tone if he needed assistance. Clint offered a friendly smile and calmly mentioned that he had come to speak with management regarding a critical business arrangement. But Ray's eyes narrowed in skepticism. He couldn't fathom that this casually dressed man had any legitimate purpose in his world of glossy sedans and sports cars. The suspense swelled with every passing second as Ray fired off a series of probing questions. What kind of business arrangement? Are you representing a third party? Who exactly is your contact here? He didn't even bother to mask his suspicion. In response, Clint tried to clarify that he had an appointment, but Ray shook his head dismissively. A silent but unmistakable tension coursed through the showroom as staff members exchanged uneasy glances, recognizing the storm brewing between the two men. Clint remained polite, though an undercurrent of frustration seeped into his voice. He repeated that he'd scheduled this visit through one of the dealership owners. Ray, arms crossed firmly over his chest, refused to relent. He insisted that no such appointment was on his agenda and that he'd be escorted out if Clint didn't leave voluntarily. At this point, even the customers picking out cars felt the friction in the air. A hush fell over the once lively space. You could practically hear hearts pounding as the scene unfolded. Ray's hostility heightened and Clint's patience strained. In that tense standoff, the stakes rose ever higher. On paper, Clint might have seemed like an unassuming visitor, but the weight of this encounter was palpable. Every moment thrummed with the promise of dramatic fallout. Though the others in the dealership didn't know the whole story, they sensed something extraordinary was at play. The difference between Ray's rigid worldview and Clint's calm assurance was about to explode in a clash of perspectives. Little did Ray realize that his impulsive reaction would soon entangle him in the most humiliating twist of fate he had ever experienced. A confrontation that would serve as the prelude to his reckoning. Clint Eastwood stood near a glistening red sports coupe, the tension in the air so thick it felt almost tangible. Ray Devlin's constant glare bore into Clint like a hawk fixated on its prey. Staff members hovered at a distance, unsure if they should intervene or pretend not to notice the growing hostility. For a moment, all was silent except for the distant hum of engines and the murmur of a mechanic testing a vehicle in the service bay. Each second of hush only added to the unease rippling through the showroom. Suddenly, a couple of curious bystanders pulled out their phones, intrigued by the altercation that seemed on the verge of boiling over. One of them recorded quietly, trying not to draw Ray's fury. The faint click of a camera shutter echoed in the open space, capturing Clint and Ray in a tense standoff. Another shopper sidled closer, apparently drawn by the star power of Clint Eastwood, whose face he finally recognized. Still, he hesitated, uncertain whether to jump in or watch from the sidelines. While the next major confrontation loomed, let's take a brief moment to connect. Comment below where you're watching from today, and if this story resonates with you, please subscribe for more. Have you ever been judged unfairly at first glance? Let us know how it made you feel and how you handled it. Thank you for staying with us up to this point. Now back to the story. Ray's voice cut through the tension like a knife as if on cue. He demanded that Clint leave immediately, insisting the man's so-called appointment was a fabricated excuse. Not one to provoke a scene, Clint inhaled a measured breath, glancing around the showroom at the unsettled staff. He'd seen men like Ray before, individuals who cling to authority as if it were their identity, eager to strip away others' dignity in a single breath. One by one, the salespeople turned their eyes to the floor, not daring to challenge their manager's authority. Clint remained calm, though the frustration was evident in the subtle furrow of his brow. He gently placed his hand on the sleek surface of the sports coupe, tapping a finger as if in deep thought. You could almost feel him weighing his following words, cautious about escalating the conflict but unwilling to simply bow to Ray's misguided judgment. Meanwhile, Ray stood there, arms folded, posture stiff, face red with fury. It was as if the entire dealership braced for an explosion of anger. Yet, Clint shook his head and stepped away from the car as though granting Ray's demand for space. Onlookers felt that fleeting moment might dissolve into something far worse. Ray might grab Clint by the arm or order security to force him out. Yet, in another twist, a receptionist approached Ray with a stack of papers, interrupting the standoff. She spoke in a low, shaky voice, trying not to provoke her boss's temper. Among the documents was a note from one of the dealership's owners confirming a significant appointment with C. Eastwood. That piece of paper, had Ray taken a second to read it, would have revealed everything. The meeting's details, the reason behind the visit, and Clint's actual status. But Ray was so angry that he barely glanced at the receptionist's trembling hand. With an impatient wave, Ray dismissed her, too distracted by his need to control the situation. In his infinite certainty, he had decided that Clint was just another troublemaker who needed to be shown the door. Oblivious to the hush settling over the other customers, Ray raised his voice again, barking that if Clint had any sense, he would leave before the police were called. Clint sighed, peering down at the papers in the receptionist's hand, instantly recognizing the letterhead. A flicker of understanding crossed his face. So, the official documents had arrived, and with them, the truth that Ray was too blinded by pride to see. In that split second, the fuse was lit for the next stage of this karmic journey. Those who stood by watching couldn't tear their eyes away. Some recorded, some whispered, some merely stared in disbelief. The tension that had been building was about to break, and Ray Devlin stood at the center of it all, too arrogant to recognize the walls closing in around him. Clint, still composed, prepared to take the next step, knowing full well that the impact of his revelation would forever alter the manager's deluded perception of control and superiority. The moment of reckoning came swift and loud. Just as Ray Devlin moved to summon the security guard stationed at the far end of the showroom, one of the dealership's co-owners, a dignified older man named Harrison Bradford, arrived through a side entrance. His face registered immediate alarm at the scene unfolding before him. Ray, flushed with anger, pointing at Clint Eastwood and demanding he leave. Harrison's eyes darted to the papers clutched in the receptionist's trembling grip. It took him only a second to piece together what was happening, and the color drained from his cheeks. "Ray, what on earth are you doing?" Harrison blurted, his voice echoing across the glossy floors. All eyes turned to him. Ray spun around, still charged with anger. Before he could respond, Harrison strode over, took the stack of documents from the receptionist, and shot a mortified look at Ray. Harrison turned to Clint Eastwood with a respectful nod in that tense silence. His tone shifted to one of profound apology. "Mr. Eastwood, I'm so sorry for this misunderstanding. Please forgive my employee's behavior." A wave of shock rippled through the staff. Suddenly, everyone realized that Clint was not just some random visitor. Word spread like wildfire. Clint Eastwood wasn't simply a high-profile client. He was poised to become a major partner, effectively the new owner of a substantial share of the dealership. The meeting Ray had been dreading all day? It was precisely Clint who had kept his involvement discreet until the final paperwork was signed. Ray stood there frozen as though his entire world had been knocked off its axis. Shaking with embarrassment, Ray stammered a few disjointed apologies, trying to salvage what little dignity he had left. I didn't realize, if I had known, this was all just a misunderstanding." But his stuttering pleas fell flat. The damage was done. His arrogance and snap judgments had been laid bare for all to see. The hush that settled over the staff was thick with judgment, not from Ray this time but of Ray. In the eyes of his co-workers, he was no longer the assured leader but a cautionary tale of what happens when one wields power without empathy or respect. Clint took a measured breath. Though visibly upset, he offered a composed nod to Harrison Bradford, acknowledging the apology without lashing out. If anything, Clint's disappointment cut more profound than any angry outburst could. Everyone who witnessed that moment could feel the weight of the consequences beginning to land on Ray. The manager's face was pale, his eyes wide with panic. Just minutes ago, he had felt invincible. Now he was cornered, forced to confront a reality in which his biases had created a giant breach of trust. As news of the mix-up spread throughout the dealership, customers looked on with interest, some with pity, others with smug satisfaction. Employees cast sidelong glances in Ray's direction, uncertain how this would affect their jobs but sure the manager's authority had been irreparably undermined. A couple of them even whispered, "Karma indeed." They had endured Ray's domineering style for years, suffering his snide comments and public reprimands. Now they saw the cosmic scales tipping against him. One employee dared to smirk behind his hand, recalling how Ray once berated him for being too slow with a VIP client. This moment felt like long-awaited justice. Ray's immediate consequence was humiliation, but that was just the beginning. Harrison escorted Clint and a few key staff members into a private office to discuss moving forward. Ray was told firmly but politely to stay behind and reflect on what had just happened. His shame deepened as he stood outside that closed door, listening to muffled voices as the official new partnership was confirmed. He could already guess the following chain reaction: shareholder inquiries, potential demotion, and then maybe even the severance of his position altogether. Worst of all was the knowledge that he had single-handedly soured the dealership's relationship with its newest and most influential stakeholder. As the door finally opened, Clint emerged alongside Harrison. Without waiting for Ray to speak, Clint addressed him directly but calmly. "It seems we have a lot to discuss, Ray. I'm disappointed in how today unfolded." In that moment, Ray couldn't hide from the truth. His actions had real, tangible consequences that threatened everything he had built. He realized too late that his old habit of judging people by outward appearances had led him into a trap of his own making. His pride had been shattered in front of his staff, superiors, and worst of all, the new owner he had just insulted. The sting of karma had arrived, and Ray found himself at a crossroads. Either face the full brunt of his mistakes and learn from them, or sink deeper into denial. With the entire dealership now watching, his next steps would determine whether he emerged with some shred of dignity, or plunged further into professional and personal ruin. The following days were a whirlwind of fallout and introspection for Ray Devlin. He spent several sleepless nights replaying the incident in his mind, haunted by the sight of Clint Eastwood's quiet disappointment and his staff's mortified stares. Waking up each morning, Ray felt a tightness in his chest, an unfamiliar blend of shame and regret he had never experienced. It gnawed at him, forcing him to confront the harsh reality that his pride and narrow-mindedness had nearly cost him his career. The dealership's higher-ups wasted no time in addressing Ray's actions. While they didn't immediately remove him from his position as manager, they placed him under strict scrutiny. Harrison Bradford scheduled a series of meetings with Ray, where he laid out expectations for a drastic change in management style. Coached by both Harrison and Clint himself, Ray was given a rare chance to redeem himself. In a private conversation, Clint was frank but empathetic. "I believe in second chances, Ray, because I've witnessed how people can grow when they realize their mistakes. But make no mistake, this opportunity doesn't come without responsibility. You have to be willing to change." Torn between pride and the fear of losing his livelihood, Ray accepted the challenge. At first, it felt like an impossible task. He'd built his entire identity on the firm belief that his unyielding discipline and sharp judgments were what made him successful. Letting go of that meant admitting vulnerability, something Ray had spent his life avoiding. Yet, with each day, he found that facing his flaws was less terrifying than living with the memory of the humiliation he had brought upon himself. As a step toward genuine change, Ray volunteered to organize a community outreach event in partnership with a local charity. The goal was to provide underprivileged teenagers with opportunities to learn about automobiles and possible career paths in the automotive industry. Ray might have scoffed at such an endeavor in the past, viewing it as a distraction from real work. Now he saw it as a chance to break free from the narrow mindset dominating his leadership approach. He spent hours liaising with charity representatives, carefully planning an open house event welcoming these young students to the dealership. He arranged workshops where the teens could speak with mechanics, learn about car engineering, and even test some basic simulations. Initially, the staff eyed Ray skeptically. They'd grown accustomed to his authoritarian style and struggled to believe this shift was sincere. But as the days progressed, they noticed small but significant differences in how Ray carried himself. He listened more attentively during team meetings, offered constructive feedback instead of scathing criticism, and even took the time to apologize to employees he had treated poorly. Clint, while maintaining a gracious distance, observed Ray's transformation quietly. In periodic check-ins, he was impressed by the growing humility of the once imperious manager. Though Ray still had a long way to go, his willingness to accept counsel and shoulder new responsibilities spoke volumes. At one point, Ray confided in Clint, nervously admitting that he had always feared being seen as weak if he showed empathy. Clint responded with a calm half-smile, "Sometimes showing empathy is the hardest strength to master." Ray's early efforts culminated when the community event finally took place. The dealership buzzed excited as young people from various backgrounds poured in, eyes bright with curiosity. Ray welcomed them at the door, a nervous smile tugging at his lips. He guided them through the showroom, explaining the dealership's history and offering insights into the cars. No longer the towering tyrant, he bent down to greet kids at eye level, patiently answering their questions. A few employees looked on, stunned to see their manager demonstrate such warmth. By the end of the day, Ray was exhausted but filled with an unaccustomed sense of fulfillment. Watching the teens leave with a newfound enthusiasm for automotive careers stirred something in him. For the first time, he recognized that leadership was about more than maintaining order or chasing profits. It was about uplifting others and fostering positive connections. The event served as the first real sign of his transformation, an indication to staff and stakeholders alike that Ray was beginning to understand the values Clint Eastwood had championed. In that fleeting moment, Ray caught Clint's eye from across the showroom. Clint offered a brief nod of approval, a silent acknowledgement that Ray was finally taking the first fundamental steps toward redemption. Although the path to mending relationships and earning genuine forgiveness remained long, this newfound sense of empathy and humility marked a turning point in Ray's life. Slowly but surely, the man who once thrived on intimidation was learning that absolute respect must be earned, and that it often starts with admitting you were wrong. Over the following weeks, the atmosphere at Bradford & Sons luxury cars began to shift in ways that many employees thought impossible. Word spread about the thriving community event and Ray Devlin's surprising change in attitude. A manager who once doled out harsh reprimands now took the time to offer mentorship and training sessions. Sales associates who feared walking on eggshells around him could voice concerns without facing an immediate backlash. Though Ray's transition was far from perfect, he still slipped into his old habits at times. The overall difference in his management style was undeniable. Customers also picked up on the renewed energy. Where the showroom once felt cold and clinical, there was now a welcoming aura, as if the luxury cars shone brighter under this new spirit of inclusivity. Harrison Bradford and the co-owners watched these developments with cautious optimism. It appeared Ray was genuinely committed to bettering himself, perhaps spurred by the sting of nearly losing everything he'd worked for. In private meetings, he addressed his past mistakes, accepting responsibility with a humility that once seemed unimaginable. Clint Eastwood maintained a steady presence throughout this transformation, though he remained discreet and respectful in his role as the dealership's new partner. By no means had he forgotten the insulting way Ray had treated him, but Clint believed firmly in the possibility of redemption. He had seen people evolve remarkably when given a second chance, and he hoped Ray's metamorphosis would be one of those stories. From time to time, Clint would drop by the dealership unannounced, offering a kind word here or a subtle suggestion there. He engaged with staff at all levels, listening to their ideas and encouraging them to shape the dealership's future. The real turning point came when the dealership hosted a grand unveiling of a new luxury model. The event drew a sophisticated crowd, celebrities, local politicians, and prospective buyers eager to see the latest automotive marvel. Tension stirred as guests remembered the scandalous rumors of how the manager had once kicked out Clint Eastwood himself. However, as they stepped inside the dealership, they were met with polished professionalism and genuine warmth. Ray, dressed impeccably but with a far softer demeanor, greeted everyone who walked through the door. He made a conscious effort to personally welcome guests from every walk of life. No assumptions, no judgments. When Clint arrived, looking every bit the Hollywood icon he was, Ray approached him immediately, extending a hand in greeting. Their handshake was firm but friendly, a symbolic gesture of mutual respect and a shared desire to move forward. Onlookers couldn't help but smile, some snapping photos of the moment. The festivities proceeded beautifully. Speeches were delivered, the new car model was revealed to gasps of delight, and prospective clients roamed the showroom as an energetic string quartet provided a classy background melody. Throughout the evening, Ray engaged with attendees, telling them about the dealership's new direction. He spoke of customer satisfaction, community outreach, and, most notably, the lessons he had learned about humility. Though some might have expected him to gloss over the scandal, Ray openly acknowledged it, saying in a careful but sincere voice, "My mistakes taught me that respect is not something you can demand. You have to show it first." To many ears, that statement marked a profound turning point. The staff, who had once tiptoed around Ray's temper, exchanged nods of approval. They recognized that something in him had truly changed. The audience, in turn, seemed impressed by his candor. Slowly but surely, Ray found acceptance not just from the community but from his team, individuals who finally saw him as a leader worth following. By the night's end, the event felt like a celebration of more than just a new automobile. It symbolized a new beginning for Ray, the dealership, and everyone involved. Clint Eastwood lingered until the final guests departed, chatting with various employees and thanking them for their hard work. Before he left, he caught Ray's eye, offering a parting nod of approval. The two men understood each other. They had come full circle, from a humiliating clash born out of prejudice to a shared vision of a more inclusive, respectful workplace. For Ray, It was a moment of closure, and a signal that his journey, though still continuing, had finally brought him back into the community's good graces. Standing in the echoing showroom, he felt a sense of peace wash over him. He realized real success was about more than sales figures and personal pride. It was about forging connections, lifting others up, and being open to change, even if that change began with a rude awakening on what was supposed to be just another day at the dealership. As the last echoes of the unveiling event faded and the staff cleaned up champagne glasses and folded brochures, Clint Eastwood surveyed the showroom one final time. The transformation was palpable. Where tension and snobbish exclusivity once lingered, a sense of camaraderie and optimism now thrived. Sales associates chuckled among themselves, discussing leads with a refreshing enthusiasm. The mechanics in the back toasted to a successful night, feeling more appreciated than ever. Even the doorman, who had often feared Ray's wrath, wore a bright smile that hinted at newfound hope. Ray Devlin approached Clint with an unguarded expression, which still felt strange on the once haughty manager. "I just wanted to say," Ray began, pausing to steady his voice, "thank you for giving me a second chance, and for showing me that sometimes, the best way to lead is by caring about the people around you." It was a simple statement, but for Ray, it carried the weight of every lesson he had learned in recent weeks. The older version of himself might have scoffed at expressing gratitude, but that person seemed miles away now. Clint nodded, warmth in his eyes. "Everyone deserves a shot at redemption," he replied, touching Ray's shoulder. "What's important is what you do with that chance." There was no condescension in Clint's words, no "I told you so," lurking behind his grin. He offered genuine encouragement, underscoring the principle that had guided his own life and career. Growth is possible if one is willing to learn from mistakes. With that, he bid Ray good night, leaving the manager to reflect on how drastically his life had changed quickly. Employees began shutting off lights, systematically powering down the bright displays that showcased the dealership's luxury lineup. Staff members filed out one by one, saying their goodbyes to Clint and Ray. Some hugged Ray, while others offered a friendly pat on the back, gestures of camaraderie he had rarely experienced. It was a subtle reminder that while forgiveness might not come at once, respect could be rebuilt through genuine effort and consistency. Clint slipped out the front doors into the balmy evening air a short while later. A crescent moon hung low in the sky, illuminating the sleek facade of the dealership he now partly owned. He paused momentarily, looking at the glowing sign of Bradford & Sons luxury cars with a reflective smile. Though he had entered this business arrangement expecting a standard negotiation, he witnessed, and spurred, a moral transformation that transcended financial gain. It wasn't every day that someone's prejudice was confronted so directly, and even less common, the person at fault took steps toward meaningful change. If you've been moved by this story of instant karma, personal growth, and redemption, there's more to explore. Life is filled with such tales, stories of people discovering unexpected lessons in the face of conflict and adversity. And we often find that when someone finally sees the error of their ways, it paves the road for a better tomorrow. If you enjoyed this story, watch another one that will touch your heart. You'll discover more moments of transformation, empathy, and resolution that offers hope for everyone willing to change. With that final note, Clint Eastwood headed to his car. Tomorrow he would return to set new goals for the dealership, ensuring it remained a place to buy expensive automobiles and a community hub that welcomed individuals from all walks of life. As for Ray Devlin, he would continue learning that authentic leadership demands an open mind and an open heart, a lesson forged from the humbling consequences of his own blind judgments. The lights dimmed, leaving behind the echoes of a story that proved how powerfully even one moment of realization can reshape a person's future. Though every story must come to a close, the ripple effects of this one, of Ray's redemption and Clint's unwavering faith in second chances, would resonate far beyond the sleek showroom, reminding all who heard it that redemption is possible, karma is accurate, and sometimes the greatest gift of all is the chance to start anew.